Hey everybody, getting started now. Letting everybody roll in for Healing is Possible. I'm going to share my mold story tonight. I'm excited to go through this. I see Instagram's getting everybody ready going as we're getting set up. There we go. Looks like people are trickling in. Awesome. Okay guys, I'm Dr. Martin Hart out here at Keystone. Thank you to Microbalance Health for having me on tonight. Tonight is Healing is Possible. We're talking about my mold background and kind of how I dealt with it and some of my chronic illness story. First of all, I want just to make sure everybody knows this is not medical advice. It's intended for informational purposes only. Hopefully you can find something useful in it. So we'll go through a little bit of my story, and you can also check out the article on sinusitis wellness where I talked a little about my background and kind of how I went through that journey. And then I'll answer some questions, a few that people sent in, and we'll chat about it. And if we have time, we'll see if there's any in the chat box, but for sure we're going to go through the ones that were sent in early. So if you've been my patient, you know I always like to try to relate to you, especially if it meets anywhere in my experience, because when you can relate to someone and you can share that experience with them, it allows you to have that connection differently, that relationship differently. So tonight's a way for me to share that. The team at Microbalance asked me to share my background and kind of how I went through that. So as I talked about in the article a bit, I was the firstborn son to a mom who wasn't supposed to have kids. They told her she was barren, that she couldn't have children. So she became a foster mother to try to get that children. She had a very motherly instinct, so she wanted to help kids and be around kids. And then I showed up unexpectedly. And so that was great and wonderful. And I always joke that I was a miracle baby, right? Thanks God's gift to my family. It was a nice little joke. I find it pretty serious though. But I was born in the 80s. And so I got all the standard vaccinations, right? Not as many as kids get now, but still had all the standard vaccines. And was the first baby to my mother, but also to that side of the family. My dad's side of the family is the first grandbaby, which was great. But I was also spoiled a bit with all the good foodstuffs and the standard American diet and all that sort of good things. And it was pretty clear pretty early that things weren't totally typical. I had some learning delays. I had some learning disabilities. I had chronic constipation as a very young child. Very, very early on. My allergies, seasonal allergies were really bad, but especially to cats, it was pretty out of control. I mean, there's plenty of times we left parties or family get-togethers early because I was having such a major allergic reaction. Now, as an adult, I look back, I kind of wonder if maybe they had mold at those houses that I was struggling with. Now, as I've worked on my immune system, I can tolerate cats much, much better. And so I kind of wonder if those places had cats and mold, right? We don't know exactly what was going on there at that point. So that was a biggie, and that started. And a big on that front is that learning delays, those learning disabilities were also social awkwardness. I maybe would have labeled at that time somewhere on probably like what would have been called the autism spectrum or a little bit Asperger's spectrum because of my learning delays and my social awkwardness and my majorly picky eating. And then started in with strep infections, chronic strep infections for me. I can remember having strep throat all the time. I knew even up into my teen years and early 20s if I was starting to get sick because my tonsils would swell so much that they would touch, okay, from all those chronic strep infections. What causes things like a chronic strep infection? You have to have immune suppression, right? Your immune system has to be tanked. What tanks an immune system? Mold. Mold is a major immune suppressant. Okay, it suppresses the immune system, and what it does in a crazy fashion is it lowers the immune system so it can't fight infections, but it ramps up the inflammatory cascade, right? So you get the bad part of the immune system ramped up and the good part's down, and so now you've got this cascade where everything gets hard. So I had chronic strep infections. That leads to something called PANS PANDAS. It's a pediatric autoimmune-induced neuropsychiatric syndrome where basically the infections attack the brain, your immune system then responds with inflammation. What that looks like in kiddos, and especially what it looked like in me, obsessive compulsive tendencies, massive anxiety. I rarely slept. I would wander the house at night. I had night terrors. I slept walked. I was a terribly picky eater. I was a very hypersensitive child. I had to have particular clothes, particular boots. I can still remember before tagless shirts were a thing, my mother cutting all the tags out because of how much they would drive me crazy, right? And it wasn't just like, oh, it's a little bit annoying. It's like, this kid can't go to school today because he's flipping out and turning red and having a meltdown because the tags feel funny, right? And so, needless to say, it caused a lot of drama in my house, but nobody knew what these things were. We frequently went to the pediatrician, and yeah, he's constipated and he's got these learning delays, but he doesn't test for ADHD, so we don't really know what it is. But just do your best, right? Try to get him to eat more fruits and veggies or whatever. And all along during this time, the house we lived in, every time it rained, and we lived in St. Louis, Missouri, so it rained a lot. Every time it rained more than just a little bit, our basement would flood. And sometimes it would flood a lot. It was an unfinished basement. And so pretty frequently I can remember having towels to wipe it up, or the box fans going to cool it off, or my dad having to put a sump pump down there. And he was doing that so often, and sometimes it was so bad. I remember one time he rigged up this sump pump to just go continuously to try to hurry up and get it cleaned out. And he set a fire in the basement because of how much water was in there and the pump having to go continuously. And so this whole time, what was brewing underneath our home was this mold output, right? And so we did our best to clean it up. My parents did their best to clean it up, but nobody, mold was not a huge thing. And for what they knew, what my dad knew, is that he had done a good job cleaning it up every time it rained. And so he thought they were doing good on that front. But little did they know, for me and for my sister, and to them to some extent, although being adults, they were probably a little less susceptible, it was suppressing my immune system and creating a neuroinflammation event for me, and creating a ton of fatigue and allergies, breathing issues. I was congested all the time. I was taking allergy pills at that point all the time, especially in my adult later years. I was taking Claritin and Allegra and whatever else consistently for years. And so now at the same time that I was going to see these doctors, my mom was taking me to homeopaths. She was taking me to chiropractors. She was taking me to tutors to try to get me the help I needed. And she was a big advocate for me. She didn't want me to get labeled as a certain thing, right? So when sometimes the school special ed teacher and guidance counselor would say, hey, there's something going on with Marty, we need to figure out what it is, she would say, look, I don't want to go get him labeled as something, but give him whatever help he needs. Okay, and so that was helpful. And I had a tutor. They would take me out of the afternoon classes and some other kids in the school. So it was a very small little private school we went to. And they would take us to this other building, and she would work on reading with us and etc. And so I'm this pandas, flary kid all the time, right? Somewhat combative if I disagreed with you, which led to a distaste and authority, which I'll talk about later, which was somewhat helpful. But she really connected with me. She took the time to get to know me, to see what my strengths were, the things I liked. And then in doing those things, she actually taught me that learning was possible and that I had potential, right? Because up to that point, a lot of life was frustrating. I mean, there was a lot of good things, right? It wasn't like there was no good things. There was lots of good things in my life, right? I had friends. I played, even if I was the weird kid, right? We still was there. But, you start to recognize you're the weird one, right? You start to recognize things aren't normal. But she let me know that healing was possible on that front, that learning was possible. And so suddenly I went from a kid who couldn't read, who would pretend to fall asleep doing Hooked on Phonics every night because of how frustrating it was. I would be at the dining room table, and I would put my head down and pretend I fell asleep so I didn't have to do it anymore. And then my mom or dad would carry me to bed. She went from that to suddenly showing me the joy of learning and taking the time to work through my learning blocks so that I became a speed reader. Reading went from one of my biggest weaknesses to one of my biggest strengths because of an advocate like her taking the time to help me through that. So I'm so appreciative of her. She was fantastic. But that also opened a window that, like, I have possibilities here. I have potential here, right? And my parents were always telling me that, but I was always running these things. I was exhausted all the time because I wasn't sleeping at night. I was wandering in the house, or I was fueling my body with terrible standard American diet. On that front, my mom had me convinced that Ninja Turtle slime, which Ninja Turtle comic books and the television show were big back then, this greens powder that we would take, this veggie and fruit powder, was Ninja Turtle slime. And she would mix it into orange juice for me, and I would drink it down. And it's what I think really gave me a lot of boost and kept me going. I would even try to convince my friends to drink it. This is Ninja Turtle slime. It's going to give you strength and all sort of stuff. And so on that front, I kept going and progressing, right? But my obsessive compulsive tendencies would get worse, and I would try to hide them, but it was difficult, especially as I got old enough to point them out. I can remember one time in basketball practice in middle school or elementary school, I was so stressed and flipped out about how long my fingernails were. They weren't exorbitantly long by any means. I probably missed a couple days from clipping them. But it had sent me over the edge in an obsessive compulsive spiral that what I thought would fix it is doing the sign of the cross over and over. So this whole afternoon in basketball practice until I can get home to clip my nails, every chance I get, I am doing the sign of the cross to try to keep things even. And this is how obsessive compulsive brain works. This thing's driving me nuts. If I do this, it'll keep it balanced. Otherwise, things are going to go out of control, right? And so I can remember one of the kids pointing out to me, why are you continually doing the sign of the cross? And I made something up about it being helpful with basketball or whatever. But like the shame I felt at that point, because like now these things I was trying to keep under control so that people didn't see was spilling out. And so it was a mess. And mold was a big driver of that. Mold was driving neuroinflammation for me. It was weakening my immune system, so I kept getting strep throat and other infections like mycoplasma and viruses. And then as I kept aging, I turned out to be really good at sports. And sports gave a place for my brain to focus. And it gave me a place that I could do my repetitive tasks. It gave me something to obsess on. But at the same time, it gave me an outlet to sweat, to get moving, to move that lymph, to detox, right? So I felt really good when I played sports. And so then I got in high school and I started weight training and doing some things like that. And I got Epstein-Barr virus. I got mono. And that really knocked me out. Where I tried to go into practices still and tried to limp through school. And they sent me home because the doctor said I had to be home. And the coach kicked me out of practice. And that was really hard for me because that was something that helped. That was something that made me feel good. That was something that was very important to me. And so my dad started putting together a vitamin regimen for me, some vitamin C, some multivitamins, some minerals, some immune boosting herbs like echinacea and things like that. And it helped some. It wasn't a cure-all, but it helped some. And so suddenly it was like, whoa, okay, there's things you can do to change these issues, right? So then I started really getting into it. I started reading books on it. I read all my dad's books on weightlifting. I read my dad's books on nutrition. I went to the library and got more books. Okay, and started learning about these things. I still didn't like to eat super healthy yet at that point, being a teenager, and I played Lyme and threw shot put, so being big was okay. So I got up to 250 pounds. And as you know, and if you don't know, mold increases weight gain for a lot of people. It's what they call an obesogen, okay? It makes you more predisposed to obesity. It does that by creating leptin resistance. Leptin is something you need to balance your weight and appetite and things like that. It's a hormone. But mold directly causes leptin resistance and can increase insulin resistance and things like that. And so it was very easy for me to gain weight and keep gaining weight until I was getting close to 250 pounds. Okay, that was too much for my barely 6-foot frame. Okay, too much at that point. And so that's a little fun fact about mold on that front. And so it was continuing to be, and I continued to live in the moldy house, and not just in the moldy house, but during my teen years, I moved into the basement. My parents were trying to do something nice for me to give me more space because it was only a 2-bedroom house and there was 4 of us. And now I'm sleeping in the moldy room every night. I'm huffing it in all the time. Every time it rains, I'm down there trying to clean up so it doesn't get on my stuff. And so I'm getting exposed more and more. Meanwhile, my anxiety is getting worse. I'm just doing a better job hiding it out front. My anxiety is getting worse. My chronic fatigue is getting worse. I'm breaking out in acne all the time, right? I'm still exhausted. I'm taking a nap every chance I get. I'm not really sleeping much at night. Every time I can remember going to football games and being on the bus, and I'd be out cold on the bus ride there. I'd wake up for the game because I was super excited for it and play great, but on the way there and the way home, out cold. And so to run that. And so it was, it wasn't until then I started getting to high school, or post-high school into college, that I really started to study this stuff even more in depth. I started to read Andrew Weil and his integrative medicine books. I started to read up on detoxification and how that could help. I started to read up on diet and change my diet. I actually had a friend of mine's mom who we were very close with, second mom, and she was at a concert that our friends and I had a band at when I performed up on stage. and she made a comment about my weight, trying to be nice, but really pointed out and hit me deep. And I said, okay, I got to do something about this. And so I started to clean up my diet and read and learn about that. And I started to feel better. And the more I detoxed, the better I felt. And the more I ate healthy, the better I felt. And it wasn't perfect, but I was heading in the right direction. And so that sent me down a rabbit trail of getting a degree in exercise science. And then I went on to want to help people more. And so I went on to get my doctorate in chiropractic medicine. But that wasn't enough. And so I wanted to study functional medicine, and then started working with Lyme cases and working with mold cases. And suddenly, throughout all these years, I went from somebody who was dealing with pandas. I was dealing with obsessive compulsive tendencies, night terrors, irritability, major anxiety, frequent allergies, digestive issues, gas, bloating, constipation, right? Chronic fatigue syndrome. I was breaking out in acne. What's really frustrating is after I started to grow facial hair, if I got exposed to mycotoxins or mold for too long, I would develop bald spots. You can actually see in some of my old videos where I was getting exposed somewhere I didn't realize, and I developed a bald spot. So I had to repair that because I know that's my sign. I'm getting exposed to mold somewhere as an adult now. Well, since I've been so detoxed, my symptoms aren't as flary, they're more subtle. And so I went from that to being so overweight and inflamed all the time, to someone who was fit, who was able to finish in some of the top of my exam scores in my board exams for chiropractic school. I was able to turn what was learning disabilities into strengths, right? Using my mind now to help other people heal. Went from having fatigue to having the energy I need to accomplish what I want, okay? And so coming through that, the point of that story is healing is possible, just like the title of this lecture, right? This live. Healing is possible when you find those answers. And so for me, it was about learning to find that, okay, nutrients can change, that you have a possibility to heal, even knowing that was a possibility. And then going on top of it and recognizing detoxifying is so important. Getting away from the mold and having a clean environment is so important. And so now, over the years, if we've been exposed, again, as adults or as our family get exposed, we know what to do now. How to clean the environment, how to detoxify everyone, to repair, because it is a big deal. Mold affects you on all levels. It affects your immune system. It affects your brain, your skin. It affects your digestion, right? All those things are impacted. And it's a lot of times what I find with cases is it's the crux piece, right? So, and I'll use this now as this point. Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate you saying that sort of stuff. That makes me feel good in my heart. The crux piece here is a question. If somebody says, let me read it off the screen here. It says, how do you test for Lyme? What tells you whether you're dealing with Lyme or mold? If you've got both, you have to deal with the mold first, typically, because it's what's keeping the Lyme in place. Okay? Mold a lot of times is a crux piece because of what it does. It epigenetically downregulates your antioxidant pathways. That means every time you make energy, you make exhaust fumes like your car does, you make free radicals that have to be cleaned up. If those aren't cleaned up, you can't keep making energy. Mold shuts that antioxidant pathway down. It slows down your detoxification. It lowers your immune system so it can't fight the Lyme. It clogs up your detoxification pathway so you can't clean out neurotoxins from the Lyme, and etc. And so it's locking that Lyme into place. I'll give you a story today, actually, from a patient. She came in, she was a referral, and she came in from a practitioner. Not that she had that many symptoms, but her labs were really bad. And so her previous functional medicine practitioner said, oh, you have viruses, which she did. Okay, she had viruses and a major immune suppression on the labs. We start testing in the clinic, and what was holding in place her viruses was Fusarium, was mold. She was having mold exposure. And so we had to clear the mold. We could keep treating the viruses over and over and over again, but they're going to come back, right? It's just like a garden you have. If the garden is just full of dirt, it's going to grow weeds. You have to put things in the place to protect it. It's the same thing with the body. You can try to clear those weeds, clear those viruses all day long, but if you don't correct the human body, the terrain, and get the mold out, then they're not going to be able to continue to fight it. So that Lyme, those viruses, etc., is just going to continue to come back. And so to answer that question, how do you tell if it's Lyme or mold? Well, you can test what's present. Are there mycotoxins present in the urine? Is there mold present in your environment? Right? You can look at mold markers. There's blood markers like complement C4A, C3A, MMP9, ADH, MSH, all those. You can look at those and say, okay, are they here? and then you ask the body. There's different ways to test the body, see what's the priority. But the reality is mold is such a crux that you have to deal with the mold if it's present. Okay, you have to. 1000% have to work on detoxifying that. I'll mix in some questions here on that front. What did I do to detox? Any recommendation on detoxing kids from mold? This kind of goes in with some of the other questions. Is how do you protect? Sorry, I'm reading out the screen back there for the questions that were submitted. How do you protect your liver and kidneys as you detox? So I'll mix these two questions into one. So what I did originally to detoxify was I had learned about doing some juice fast and juice flushing. So I would do some of that. I was using a binders. I was using activated charcoal at that time quite a bit. I was doing some liver herbs that were supportive milk thistle. I was doing senna to clean it out. And I was doing lots of sweating, right? Whatever I could do to sweat at that front. So that was my original detoxification plan. Later on, I would develop more detailed detoxification plans, liver flushes, coffee enemas, sauna routines, etc. All customized to what I felt like I needed at the time. That's how I do it for patients, is customize it. Any recommendation of detoxing kids from mold? You know, it's got to be, they can do all the similar things. It just has to be tailored down. And kids specifically respond really well to homeopathic remedies, basically energetic remedies. They respond really well to those. They can use low-dose binders in a great way. They do well with that. And things like sauna, they can sauna. You just have to do it. Usually we do 1 minute per age. So if there's 8 years old, they do 8 minutes of sauna, right? Just keep them really hydrated. Keep the kiddos hydrated, getting them playing and sweating a ton. Get those lymphatics moving, getting them sweating out. How do you protect the liver and kidneys while you detoxify? Number one, don't try to go crazy overnight, okay? Go slow and open up your drainage channels first. Okay, so that means make sure you're sweating, make sure you're having bowel movements, you're staying hydrated so you can urinate, keep all those drainage channels open. Number two, you want to use binders, right? If you're going to take the garbage out, you might as well put it in a garbage bag. Use a toxin binder for that purpose. Then there's various herbs that protect the liver and kidneys. You know, ginger is great for the kidneys and liver and gallbladder. There's NAC. There's things like milk thistle. There's things like dandelion root. There's solidago, all that sort of stuff. Bitters are all great ways to protect those organs while you're detoxifying on that front. So that's a really great way to do that. How to heal the sinuses. First, you want to make sure you clear the junk out of sinuses, right? So a lot of times there's marcons, there's a staph infection that grows with mold because of immune suppression, right? We don't want to forget that. So you may want to do, we use a different nasal sinus blends. So Microbalance has some great nasal sprays. They've got the Citrus Drops nasal spray. They're fantastic on that front. You can use different silver ones. I mix essential oils in there sometimes on the nasal sprays. And then once you start getting things cleaned out, then you want to use something to help heal the membranes, right? So there's different fulvic acid, humic acid blends that help to do that. You can also use a humic and fulvic acid blend in a stronger concentration because it binds mold and mold toxins. You can use that intranasally, which is a great option on that front. So those are really great ways to heal the sinuses. Learn to breathe through the nose, okay? Learn to breathe through the nose. Doing that helps to clear things out. All that oxygen helps to keep microbes out of there. That's a great way to help the sinuses. How do I detect mold in the air? Really good question. A couple different routes. You could use the mold toxin plates from EC3. I don't have one in front of them. They're all up front. We've probably sold a few sets today actually to patients because we use them so often. They're Petri dish plates. You leave them out in the area for an hour, stir the air up, put on fans, go in there, move around. So that way you can see what grows on the plate. There's other testing methods too. There's EMA and ERMI, et cetera, to see if there's mold in the air. I prefer those ones over typical air sampling, just what I've seen work best. But that's a good way to detect if there's mold in the air present in your home. If you don't know, test. Don't guess, test. Figure out it's in the home. How did you realize mold was an issue in your health journey? Realized it, number one, because of how often I was exposed. And so that was a biggie, how often I was getting exposed to mold testing, to mold exposure. And so this is the plates we use, by the way. It's EC3 plates that are we use to test. They're fantastic. All the instructions are in there, the guides. I'll show you what a plate looks like if you guys haven't seen them. Petri dish just like that. You can use that to see what's going on. So that's a really good setup that we use quite a bit and quite often to kind of make sure the house is staying clean. So I have people continue to test to make sure the house is staying clean. So we knew it was an issue for me through that front, through testing. We did different forms of testing, whether it was bioresonance or direct resonance testing, different urine and blood testing that we did that showed that mold was a problem for me. But then just frequent exposure, recognizing how I reacted to mold. My reaction to mold is a lot better now, but if I'm in it too long, it'll still create an issue for me. How do you test patients for Lyme? So how I test patients for Lyme, I used some direct resonance testing, frequency testing on that front quite a bit. We use some other labs, some blood labs, some cutting edge blood labs to help us measure all sorts of different antibody and PCR testing. You have to use a panel when you test for Lyme. So this isn't too much into the topic of mold, but the way we test is we use a big panel like that. So that way you can get the best result. The typical standard like CDC recommended setup is not the best. And again, this is not medical advice and informational purposes only, but you need to look into alternative blood testing on that front and potentially resonance or frequency medicine testing. We already talked about if you're dealing with mold or Lyme. Do you find that heavy metals are an issue in most of your patients? Yeah, I mean, we're all exposed to heavy metals constantly, right? Especially things like aluminum. If you're using aluminum deodorant, stop cooking in aluminum. Okay, but heavy metals are a lot. What I find most often is heavy metals are not the highest priority. And very often if we're working on detoxifying mold, I have to do a lot less heavy metal detox for that person, because once we get the body doing it, then they clear it out. Because in history, we would always have been exposed to a certain amount of heavy metals. It's in the soil, it's in the water, right, on some low levels. Now we have high levels because of industrial farming and manufacturing and things like that. And what we put it in, like Tums and Rolaids, those have a lot of heavy metals in them, and then we chew them up and swallow them. So that's great. So it's a big issue, yes, but I find if you're doing other detoxification or taking care of the mold, you don't need to do as much heavy metal detox. And we talked about putting too much strain on the liver and kidneys. How do you help a toddler with possible mold exposure? She was recently diagnosed with autism. Many of my autistic kids and pandas kids that we treat here at the clinic, we do a lot of pediatric cases, okay? Work with a lot of kids, have mold exposure, right? Because it's similar to my story, right? Mold exposure is going to lower your immune system, so now you're more prevalent to other infections, and it's going to raise your inflammatory rate. What do we know about pandas? What do we know about autism? Neurodevelopmental issues, yes. What are driving them? Inflammation, okay? Maybe different causes that are driving the inflammation, but it's inflammation in the brain driving it. So how do you help a kiddo or even a toddler, right? They can take small doses of these things. They can take small doses of binders. Humic and fulvic acid as a mold binder, it's a very good mold binder, can go in liquids and waters. Homeopathics work fantastic. Sinus Defense is a really great microbalance homeopathic product that's great for rebuilding the immune system. Celltropin, fantastic for the brain. And kiddos do fantastic with it. They're sprays. Just get in their mouth, spray, good to go. Kiddos can take supplements, right? They can take smaller doses than humans, right? Just dose dependent, small doses, and you mix it in a little bit of like coconut yogurt or a little bit of applesauce. They take it down, boom. And if you don't make it a big deal, they don't make it a big deal. And a lot of times they end up loving it because they feel better, okay? So we do that a lot with toddlers, and toddlers respond really well to hands-on care. So lymphatic massage, they do well with body work, chiropractic care that helps keep the inflammation down, keep everything flowing. They do really well with that front. I wouldn't necessarily do any toddlers in the sauna or like an ionic foot bath, but they could do an Epsom salt bath with you. You could do a low-level Epsom salt bath with toddlers and kiddos in there to help detoxify that magnesium sulfate. So there's great ways to detoxify kiddos. We're doing pretty good on time, so I'm going to go through the feed here and see if there's any questions I mixed. How do you deal with inflammation in the brain? That's a great question because you need to lower the brain inflammation to get some relief on that front. I do find a ton of benefit for the brain with celltropin. Okay, I really like that. Sometimes I use it later after we started detoxifying, but celltropin from Microbalance, really great homeopathic product for helping the brain, okay? Then there's other things. There's different herbs you can take, but fish oil is a biggie, okay? Fish oil is really important, especially EPA for its anti-inflammatory effects, DHA for its brain protective effects, okay? That's a biggie. Detoxifying and binding really helps protect the brain. Really important on that front. So that's really good for the brain. Is mold unavoidable? We will save this chat, by the way, this going. Is mold unavoidable in houses? Well, mold's everywhere. right? Mold everywhere. So it's going to be some in houses. The important point is what's your tolerance level and how much is in there. So you can test inside versus outside and see if there's a big difference. You can test what types are there. But if there's, so what I like about the Petri dishes and the guide, so we test all sorts of new buildings, new rooms, and we test frequently. If there's 1 or 2 spores, it's a normal level, it's okay. There's 10 spores, big problem. Way too much mold growth for human health, okay? Mold levels are getting higher because of the way we manufacture houses now. The more energy efficient your house is, the more it's a mold breeding ground. Drywall, mold breeding ground. Humidity, mold breeding ground. Indoor plumbing, right? So we can lower some of those things. There's great ways to lower that, right? We can make sure the plumbing fittings well. We can caulk more in certain areas. Lots of circulating air, right? Air purifiers, etc. Is it unavoidable to some degree? Yes. Are you able to avoid toxic levels of mold in the house? Yes, you are. And you can do things like air purifiers and fogging. EC3 has a great fogger, great couple of foggers and their solutions. Highly recommend it, right? Things like the candles they use. I have patients take those all over the place for them when they're traveling because it lowers the mycotoxin and mold count in the air. So there's ways to do it. That's really, really good on that front. One of the things you can see there is to make sure that you test and see if it's toxic. Test, don't guess. How long does it take for mold if you don't know how long your exposure was? Well, the biggie is to try to get out of any current exposure, right? So if you're having an exposure, you want to try to minimize it or get out of it. If you don't know how long you were exposed in the past, that's okay. That's not a problem because you know now, and then you're going to start to work on it. Some people have incredible results within the first month of starting to work on detox and healing from mold recovery, doing mold recovery work. Okay, sometimes it takes a little longer. It depends on what other cases. If you've got Lyme mixed in there, it's going to take a little longer. You've got parasites, a little longer. But in general, people see results very, very quickly where they're starting to get functional and regain their health and their energy and their mental clarity within 2 to 4 weeks of starting a mold protocol. Okay. Let me just... yeah, the mold fogger with EC3 concentrate is so good. How often should you fog? If you're fogging with something like EC3, you can fog as often as once a week, right? So, or maybe even more if you really wanted. There's no problem fogging more, but I'll have a lot of patients fog once a week. We'll fog pretty often just to keep things cleaned up, or if patients are tracking in and out with potentially moldy stuff, you want to make sure you're keeping your furniture fogged and things like that. So you can fog really often. How do my parents react to the mold or respond to the mold? I don't want to speak too much for them. They do have their own chronic health issues. On that front, I will tell you, when my mom runs, she has major allergies, breathing issues, etc., heart issues, and when they test her for mold allergies, she's off the charts allergic to all forms of mold. So I know for sure she was majorly impacted. My dad has his own health issues that probably were impacted, but I don't want to speak too much for them on that front. When you know you're sensitive, do you do things every day to sort of protect yourself from mold? Yes. Take a binder daily. Big on that front. Some of the different homeopathic products that Microbalance has no-sodes in them, which are like homeopathic constituents of molds and different tissues and sarcodes and things like that can help your body build a tolerance for them better to protect you in that front. I wouldn't say you could say, oh, let's just do that and still live in mold. Take the right steps, but it helps protect you if you're exposed. Taking liver support, a big protective, right? Continue to do things that are anti-inflammatory. Great way to protect yourself. Guys, we're doing great in this half-hour mark. I'm just going to look through and see if there's other big questions I think people would really want. Yeah, happy to help you guys. Glad you guys are coming out. How often should you fog? I believe we answered all the questions in the email. So thank you guys for submitting those on these in the future lives. Feel free to submit it early because the questions are great. Is it possible to clear a home that has mold so it's livable for mold-sensitive people, or do you recommend people move out to a new place? Look, if you know the mold levels are toxic, I recommend you get out until the levels are non-toxic, okay? If that's possible. Avoid it as much as you can while you're trying to recover and so you're unexposed. Is that always possible? No. But do everything you can to make it possible. Remove yourself, and if you can't, fogging's a great option. Using the EC3 candles, great option, right? Air purifiers, great option. Changing your air filters for your HVAC once a month using a high quality. If you can see through that air filter, it's not working for you. okay, in the HVAC unit. So change that out often, keeping lots of circulation through, lots of fresh air in there, and cleaning up whatever the cause was. Leaky roof, leaky pipes, spilled water, whatever. Hope that answers that question for you. Do you use ozone in your nose? Sometimes I will do ozone and sulfurations for patients. I don't do it a ton, not because it's not useful, but because other things we're doing is working. The nasal sprays are working, the nebulizing is working, things like that. We do have room for new patients, guys. Feel free to call or email in. Happy to help you out. We're so happy to be able to help people who are dealing with the same issues I dealt with, or maybe worse, right? Or maybe not as bad, either way. But I do feel very blessed that we got to come through that journey. And I do have to say thank you to my parents and my family helping through that journey, my wife helping me through that journey. We met when I was young, and so helping me through that healing journey, and getting to now help others and pay it back forward. This link will be saved. How do you shrink nasal polyps? That's a big question, but start with getting rid of the cause of them. Sometimes they can be removed. Sometimes they shrink on their own where the inflammation goes down. When you get rid of the mold and marcons and fungus in the nose and the inflammation there, that's a big one. Do you like ozone for remediation? It's helpful, but you got to remove the source, right? So there's a protocol. We use ozone and use the fogger at the same time. Just depends. You guys, this was so fun. Thank you so much for joining. We will save this video and post it up later so you can watch back. Thank you for participating tonight. I hope that hearing my story, knowing that it's possible to go from those exposures, go through those issues, and come out on the other side is possible for you. I hope that gives you help. I hope that gives you hope and help. I hope you guys recognize how awesome a company like Microbalance is with what they're doing, providing ways to test and figure out if your home is safe, providing ways to make your home safe, providing supplements and homeopathics and products like that to help you recover. Guys, a big shout out to them. Thank you. Remember, tonight's not medical advice, informational purposes only. Share this with anybody you find it useful. You guys, take care.